Oh boy.
When I wake up each day, I feel so weary. Try to face the world, but it's so dreary. But I found that special thing that makes me cheery. Time to do music theory. Music theory.
You're watching Adventures in Music Theory with your host, Dr. Robbins. Howdy. Welcome to the Thursday, April 16 edition of Online 20th Century Idioms. If you can sense the excitement in the air, it's because today is the day when we get to talk a little bit about the first movement of the Schoenberg Fourth String Quartet. So, this is a quartet that's from Schoenberg's 12-tone period, and I'd ask you all to go look at those first couple pages of the quartet, see if you could find some row forms, and then figure out what Schoenberg was doing with his notes and how those notes might be relating to the row forms after you built a matrix from that row. What I didn't do was ask you to go listen to the piece. And I'm not sure if anybody did or not, but I thought we might do that. So I have a recording here. So let's give a listen to just the first minute or so of the piece, just to say we did it. It'll be fun. Here we go. Okay, and I'm going to stop it there because YouTube is going to flag this as having a copyright violation on it. But at any rate, you can hear a little bit of it, and I play a little bit of it to illustrate the point I made on one of the last lectures when I was talking about the various composer personalities of some of these 12-tone composers. And I mentioned how from the Second Viennese School, Schoenberg was the one who tended to adhere most closely to classical thinking about musical materials. He tended to not write in a hyper-romantic style like Berg or in a very abstract style like Weber, but instead he tended to write like the generation of composers that preceded him from the 17 and 1800s, and he often wrote in classical styles. And this is an example of a piece in the classical style. It's the first movement of a string quartet, and it's in sonata form, albeit without the tonal relationships we expect from sonata form, since this is in serial musical language. But if you look at his materials, you can see how those materials are very strong and motivic and thematic. And the opening gesture that happens in the first violin, that's bracketed in by the Hauptstimme that I've got circled in red on the page now, that's actually not just Schoenberg's tone row, but it's also going to function as the primary theme of his sonata form. And there it is bracketed out. And it's a very good theme for a sonata form because it's very motivic. It's got a lot of repetition and a lot of things we can focus on and hear as they get developed. It's got that do 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 boo boo. You know, it's very motivic, very tight, and the stuff that accompanies it is equally tight. You know, it's those short staccato stabby chords between the other three instruments. So from those opening measures in the first violin, you can get the row. And there it is on the top of the page in blue ink. I'm using fixed 0. And since I'm using fixed 0, I'm labeling that row that starts on D, P2. Now to get the inversion, what you could do is you could do that index number trick I showed y'all last time, where you look at the first number, double it, and then get every single number underneath to equal that when you combine it with the number in the row above it. So the first number is 2, so we double that, and that means our index number is going to be 4, or 12 plus 4, 16 if we have bigger numbers. So I'll add 2 to 2, which means that the first inversion note is going to be 2. I'll add 3 to 1 to get 4. I'll add 7 to 9 to get 16, and on we'll go. And there in red ink now you can see what the inversion looks like. So now we've got row P2 and row I2. And of course, if I read from right to left, I've also got R2 and RI2 available. But I ask y'all to build a complete matrix. So hopefully you have something like this handsome devil that you've created, because that's what the matrix for the piece would look like. And I've done a fixed 0 integer matrix. You don't have to do that. If you wanted, you could have done integers that were movable 0 and started with that D being called 0 and the C sharp being called 11, and the 9 would be a 7 and the 10 would be an 8, and it would, it would be different. Or you could have even done a pitch class matrix that just said D, C sharp, A, B flat, F, if you wanted to do it that way. But I like the fixed 0 integer matrix, and that's what I'll be using today. And it might be the case that the thing that happened to you is this. Once you made your nice, beautiful, lovely matrix and went to turn it loose on analyzing this piece, you may have suddenly felt like your matrix wasn't doing you a lot of good. Because there are places where it works great. Case in point, first violin part in the first 5 measures, where you can totally look in there and see how it's giving us the P2 form of the row. And that works very, very nicely. Even looking down at that second Hauptstimme down there in measure 6 in the second violin, that might have been useful to you, because you notice that it starts with an ascending half step instead of a descending half step. That's an inverted form of the row. Since it's starting on G, I guess that would be I7. And that works nicely too, going into the next page. But then there's stuff like the people who aren't playing the primary melody. There's the second violin who's going B flat, A flat, F sharp, E, B, C sharp, and you can scour through your matrix and you're not going to find those notes in succession anywhere. The matrix is a little bit like a word hunt when you do it that way. Or you look at the viola part that goes D sharp, E, G. You're not going to find those notes in succession in the matrix. Likewise, the cellos, F, C, B natural, not a portion of the matrix that has a row that starts like that, no matter where you are. So there may have been some head scratching with that. Here's the thing. What Schoenberg's doing is he's thinking trichordally about his row. And I threw some boxes on the top of the page there. And they're colored boxes for a reason. I'm thinking that that's going to make this easier to see. But what Schoenberg does is this. If you'll look at the notes in the first stabby little chord in the second violin, viola, and cello, then you'll notice that those notes, when you stack them up, F sharp, D sharp, B flat, those integers are 10 and 5 and 3. Excuse me, not F sharp, D sharp, B flat, F natural, D sharp, B flat. Those notes are 10 and 5 and 3, which is the third trichord of the row. So that's why it's got the green box around it. I've taken the blue box that shows us the first trichord of the row, the 2-1-9, D, C sharp, A, and I've put it around those three pitches in the first violin part. And you can probably see where this is going to head out. The second chord from the lower three instruments in the first measure has C and E and A flat, 4 and 0 and 8, which is the third trichord of the set. And then the last chord in that measure has the pitches B and G and F sharp, notes 11, 7, and 6. So suddenly, once you see all the colors show up there, you realize there's a logic to how Schoenberg is writing those weird little chords that are underneath the melody. And what that's actually doing is that's meaning that Schoenberg manages to create in close proximity a collection of all 12 pitches sounding nearly at the same time. He creates an aggregate, to use our term from last time. And remember, this idea of creating aggregates is one way that composers find to circumvent the process of one pitch establishing itself as a tonal center. The more you hear all the pitches, the harder it is for one pitch to reign supreme. So let's keep moving into the second measure. We can go on and we can look for other trichords to be presented. Now, by now, the first violin has moved on, and it's presenting the second trichord of the melody, the B flat, F, E flat, 10, 5, 3 portion, and that's green boxed on the top system there. So it would make sense to expect that at some point in the measure, we're going to find the 408 trichord as well, some sonority that has C and E and A flat. And that's actually happening right on the second beat of the measure in that first chord. So there's the red box. And then the chord on beat 3 in that measure has G and F sharp and B natural in it. That's our final trichord. And at the end of the measure, Schoenberg's placed his first trichord, the one with D, C sharp, and A natural in it. And when we go to the third measure, the violin's moved on to the third trichord, to the 048, which is actually an augmented triad too. And while the violin is playing that third trichord, the notes that are on beat 2 in the chord from the lower three instruments are F sharp, B, and G, which is the fourth trichord, the yellow box. And then they go back to the beginning of the row and they play the D, C sharp, A trichord, and follow it with the B flat, F, E flat trichord, like that. Moving to the second system, that's where the first violin finishes off the row with the final trichord, the G, F sharp, B, the yellow box. And that's accompanied by the first trichord, the D, F sharp, or the D, A, C sharp, excuse me. And of course then we go to the B flat, F, E flat second trichord. And that last chord in measure 6 is the third trichord, the C, E, A flat. And I mentioned a minute ago how at the second Hauptstimme in the second violin, Schoenberg starts a new row form, the I7 row form, but he keeps this type of aggregate thinking going on. So when he starts that I7 row form, he's still gonna cut his row into trichordal chunks. And the second violin, when it plays G, A flat, C natural, that's 7/8-0. And then when we get to measure 7 and the violin plays E or B, E, F sharp, that's the second trichord. But you'll notice that while it's moved on to that in measure 7, if you look at the chord that's played by the first violin and the viola and the cello, that's a C, G, A flat, 7/8-0, first trichord of the row chord. And that's accompanying that second trichord, 11/4-6 sonority. And then on beat 4 of that measure, we have the C, A flat, G chord yet again and stuff. So he's halfway through the inverted form of the row here. And then here I've got the second system and the third system where you can see them, because it's not until he gets into measure 8 that he actually gets all the way through the I7 row, and he gets through it horizontally, melodically in the second violin, who states the whole inverted form of the row. But as that's happening, you can also see how it's being accompanied by trichords extracted from the row and assigned to the other three instruments. And then when we move into our next phrase, Schoenberg starts moving backward through that, because the first violin takes the melody and plays B, F sharp, G, A flat, C, E, which is the retrograde version of our original row, which was P2. Now he's going backward through that, so it's R2. And while he's playing retrograde 2, he's accompanying whatever trichord he's on melodically, he accompanies harmonically with the other three trichords. So what you see when you look at that page is you see these little rainbow box arrays happening, where you can tell that all four trichords are going on at the same time, because you can see all four colors down there. See, this color coding is great. And Schoenberg stays true to this way of thinking about the materials as he goes through measures 12 through 16 as well. Again, just look and take note that all the colors tend to be showing up with one another there. So he's still working with that same, retrograded version of his original row as we go through this. And then when we get down to the bottom of this system, he's moved back to the inverted form of the row he was writing at the beginning, the one that starts out G, A flat, C. Remember the second violin played that? But now he's assigned that melodically to the cello down there with the Hauptstimme in measure 17. And if you look, when he gives that row to the cello, he doesn't give it the same rhythms and even the same contour that the second violin had. Now the cello is playing longer note values, and the cello has taken that opening G, A flat minor second and displaced it to become a major seventh. And of course, the thing that makes life worth living as we're analyzing this is being able to look at what's going on with the accompaniment there. And you can see how the cello is always being supported with its melodic trichords by harmonic trichords that tend to complete the row and tend to keep this piece very chromatically saturated, very aggregated, to where we've got that sense of all the pitches being present and no pitch being the tonal center. I'm betting if you all clicked onto this slide and saw more of the Schoenberg and more of me taking us through it measure by painstaking measure, you would freak out and come get me. So we're done with that. But I wanted to spend this time looking at how Schoenberg builds the opening portion of his fourth quartet, because it's useful, it's instructive, it teaches y'all something, it kills time, but also it illustrates something about the nature of serial music that I think is worth pointing out, which is that the way this music works is not simply that a composer creates a matrix and then starts unleashing various row forms throughout the piece. He doesn't just randomly choose to write left to right across, and then when he's out of notes, decide, oh, well, now I'm going to write from the bottom to the top with a different retrograde inversion form. Oh, and now I'm done with that, so I'm going to write from the top to bottom with an inversion form. And it's not simply the matter of a person going in and choosing higgledy-piggledy different row forms out of the row, which is sometimes the way that people who are especially critical of this form of music tend to run it down. But what we see with Schoenberg is he actually didn't dip deeply into the whole matrix at all for those opening 2 pages. Instead, he only used the P2 row form and the I7 row form and the retrograde version of that inverted row form. But he built everything in the first couple pages from that. What he really did was he thought like a composer. He was very economical with his materials. And once he used the row melodically for his themes. He opens up with P2 as the main melodic idea in the first violin, but when it comes time to accompany that melodic idea, he doesn't just randomly assign a different row form to the second violin or the viola or the cello, but instead he sticks with that one row form he's using in the first violin melodically, and he extracts harmonic things, chords from it, and accompanies that way. So hopefully you all get a sense from seeing that how there is sort of a craft and an art that goes into this. And this music is just like any music. There are people out there who are going to write it, who are going to write good stuff, and there are people out there who are going to write using this, and they're going to write bad stuff. But I want you all to sort of see how this can play out. Okay, here's one more tune I'd like us to listen to. There. Wasn't that kind of nice? That was Luigi Dalla Piccolo Quartina from the Quaderno Musicale d'Anna Libra. And it's actually a very, very lovely piece of music. And I thought you'd enjoy hearing it. That's the good news. The bad news is this. It's also your homework for next time. I've put the music on Moodle and Google Classroom, and what I want you to do, in case you can't see this coming, is this. Figure out the row. It is presented melodically very early. I'd like you to make a matrix of it. Preferably fixed zero integer, but whatever gets you through the day. And then identify some of the row forms he's using. He's not doing anything like Schoenberg does with the partitioning and trichordal thinking, but he does have the same issue we see in the Schoenberg, which is how do we handle chords? And how do we unscramble those? So it'll be good practice for you doing that. And the best news about this assignment is it's not something I want you to hand in. It's something that we will go over on Tuesday's lesson. And on Tuesday's lesson, we're also going to go over something else, the development that happens to serial composition after World War II. Basically, there are going to be some people who think Schoenberg didn't go far enough. So we're going to talk about this thing called total surrealism on Tuesday. And we'll look at some works that illustrate it. But in the meantime, you all have fun hanging out with your new best friend, Dalla Piccola. And I will be in touch. And take care of yourselves. And I will see you Tuesday. Enjoy.